Thanks.
Okay,
This is
so
coffee.
we recording, and I'm very happy that we continue this fall autumn session of our iteration of School of Radical Imagination, School of Mutation. And I'm particularly happy today to have with us representative of the Society of the Friends of the Virus, and Renee and Irene, and also, I don't know, should I mention also Luis, whom I don't know, but it's a pleasure to meet here. And from my point, I can only say that when pandemic just started, so I guess it was somehow 22nd of March, it was actually mentioned in our announcement. We are on the list of, I don't know how you call it, we should be really sensitive if you call it 16 beaver list or something else. But we receive information, and then we receive amazing message about the Society of the Friend of the Virus. I said, what? What's this? How it can be? Then I started to read it, and I was so fascinated with the text. I'm not professional translator, not at all, but at the same time I felt incredible pressure and urge it should be translated into Russian. And actually sometimes you read text through, and especially English is not my language, and you just read it mm, somehow superficially, I would say. But this time I really would like to get sense of each word and start to translate it into Russian. Then I feel in many situations I was failing because the language was so rich, so poetic, so politically nuanced. And we invited our dear comrade Alexander Skidan, who is actually one of the greatest translators of poetry from English into Russian. And he joined me, and he was also so excited about this text. So we finally managed to get that first introduction. Today I was actually reading more next issues, and second and third and fourth, and still was kind of inspired because I think for me it was one of the most key intellectual text and reflection on the condition of the world today, and particularly in this very sensitive issue in relation to virus, how we communicate, what can we do, and actually all our positions. So I'm really happy that today, unfortunately, we just shared remarks on that sad situation, not sad, tragic situation around Armenia. I can also add about situation in Minsk. Actually looks like that the borders of ex-Soviet, ex-socialist world is exploding. Bishkek, where everywhere we have some friends and anxiously following that kind of development of the situation, which is still not sorted out neither in none of these places. So, and for us, this moment again, because we again at the in as I like to repeat, in a kind of a limbo. We don't know what will be next week, what kind of measures, lockdowns, semi-lockdowns, restriction on public gathering, travels. Nikolai missed his flight, not missed, it was cancelled simply. And it's again reminds me, bring me back emotionally into that situation when I first time encountered your text and start to translate it. So for me it was kind of deja vu, some kind of, and that's why it's a big value to meet you today and hear your reflection, how society was first came into life, how it develops, and how you would maybe analyze its positioning, because you also, I hope you tackle, because through all that period you run incredibly intensive assemblies with your friends, and it reminds me virtually that amazing meeting in real space of 16 Beaver in Lower East Side in New York, where you can spend the whole days and go into night with the cooking, with everything, which we miss a lot. So, so please, let's do it informally, start, and we'll see what kind of question pop up. I have few, and I'm sure other people also have, because we have very intimate gathering, and people might know you well, and Alexandra and Nico definitely have also vivid memories of 16 Beaver and you. So please, thank you so much for joining, and yeah, we're looking forward.
Well, I can start with a little, maybe something about the name Society of Friends, because we, along with other friends, have also been part of different Society of Friends, one of which is the Society of Friends of Parhesia, I think Parisia. Parisia.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the others, Society of the Friends of the Virus, Society of Friends, in a way, it also, the name of Society of Friends, it's almost like in the times when first the notion of philosophy started in, let's say, in Greece, the transformation from like a notion of the magician and the sage, was it for a transformation of a society of the friends of wisdom. So it's an interesting kind of relation to thought, not to say that it's this is the only way to approach it. But so, what would be the Society of the Friends of the Virus? And I mean, today I was just reflecting on names in general, and the name virus and our names and any name. And I was wondering if at some point, was it ever the case that the so-called humans were living without names, or is there an imagination of a place where we would be without names? So instead of, like, if I want to remember you, I would start to remember, and you don't have a name, I don't have a name, and even proper nouns. So you will say, the one who made this gesture, and you would do the gesture, or the one who gave me this kind of kind present when we were doing this and this together. So I mean, it was just an imagination of something of if I want to think of the virus without having this name, or COVID-19, or all these technocratic names that create also, what do they create with them, names and naming, even with our own name, how we become also distant from something that is more at the source of, let's say, closer to a source of our being together. Our name is a part of a kind of isolation and separation from that source of a being together. And so for me to think of the virus, what is it if it didn't have this name? I mean, then we can start a whole kind of a trip of thinking of something that actually personally brought me more together to that, which actually is the process of thinking that may enable me to get closer to something that brings us together and does not separate us even from everything around us, whether it's so-called nature or so-called human or so-called stones, seas, everything. So in a way, it's an interesting way to, maybe I thought to start to put this in place.
Can I add something? Because maybe you don't remember, but it was very interesting tradition in Soviet Union, because we grew up with incredible number of Society of the Friends of the Cuba, of Nicaragua, of Vietnam, and actually you can join them, I remember it was permanently, it's even houses. dedicated to Society of the Friends was really very interesting tradition. Dom Дружбы and Society of the Friends of the People, Dom Дружбы Народов, of the whole nations or folks, so to say. And just short remarks, which really, thanks for your deep philosophical references, but this was really our childhood was filled with different friends societies. Yeah. Sorry for interruption. Yeah.
No, it's not. What shall I add to that? I mean,
You can start
think-
from another point also. You don't
Yeah.
have to.
I think it was rhetorical.
I see.
No, not really. It's not rhetorical. It was helping me find my bearings. I think you know, maybe the feeling is sometimes, you know, you're preparing always, you know, like a lot of what we do is, I think, artists, uh, at least our way of using that space is in a way preparing for what comes. And it's very different to me than like a researcher. And though artists may research something, um, it's more, I mean, let's say in our approach to that space called art, which is in a way, I think, a necessary space for everyone, not just like an enclosed group of people. But the way we use it is like a space of thinking, you know, learning, searching for meaning, but also preparing somehow for what is to come, so that you are actually sensitive and sensibilized to find a way to respond and have it kind of traverse you in a way that you could also be present to it, to its unfolding. And so I think for us in this time, it was obviously this immense feeling, which I think a lot of people felt, that something is shifting very rapidly, but it's at the same time not unfamiliar. It's things that we've been already preparing ourselves to feel and understand. And suddenly, in a rush of a period of some months or weeks, everything is kind of thrust into a manifest level, you know? So, on a global level, which is one of the most difficult aspects of what we've been preparing ourselves for, we know it's kind of happening on an earthly, global level, planetary scale, and yet everything happens as like isolated pieces, like a war here, a revolt there, something there, an ice shelf collapsing there, some temperature change there, a big fire there, a big flood there, you know, small localized catastrophes that all are met with emergency response, and yet something doesn't happen on a scale that's like planetary. I mean, climate change, we can say is similar, but I mean, we could put that aside because I think the notion itself is problematic, you know, because it's you know, similar to the virus, they're isolations of this planetary kind of deterioration, whether it's on a social, ecological, political level. The fundaments were faulty, and the assumptions were quite skewed. And so in this moment, maybe one has been prepared, unlike maybe others who are researching a specific thing, to find words that could at least both take distance and speak to it or with it. And what is that it? I mean, it's exactly connected to what Irene was saying. I mean, in a way, the isolation, we were trying to both address this kind of demonization or kind of making this an enemy of the virus, which is very, it sounds silly, but it's very dark in the sense of its current unfoldings too, because it becomes a prop through which new regimes of control are placed. And we see all the contradictory ways that that's played out in the last months, as well as it's a way of fixing meaning, which I think if you come from a certain tradition of thinking and approach that we're kind of more connected to philosophically and politically, I mean, it's really the you're already lost if you accept the meaning of that is like a consensually but produced, manufactured. So it's kind of, we felt that at that level it was important. Of course, since we wrote that original text, a lot has changed. I think more and more kind of people from a left tradition, let's say, have tried to, you know, even it was weekly, so it changed within a matter of even a month or 2 or 3 weeks. I think we found more comrades, let's say, or people who could be closer to the Friends Society friends with time, as I think more voices came in, but also people adjusted their way of trying to narrate what was going on. But trying to treat it like, let's say, come back to climate change, it's very reductive. You know, the trouble with a notion like climate change, similar to, we could get to the virus more, but I'll stay with that, is that you basically delimit the entire set of conditions that produce that, you know? So it's like when you have an illness and they say, you have that, you know? They don't think about what produced that. They just say, we're gonna go after that thing. And so you'll have like all these great energies and minds focused on how to reduce like CO2. Say we have to sequester it, we have to do this, we have to. And meanwhile, like all the other processes are assumed that we could deal with it in the same way, which is just treat it topically, treat it. So don't treat the underlying, just deal with it when it comes in that kind of nuclear option way, your chemical option way. And so this is very probably the way the things have gone and seem to keep wanting to go, but it seems to us very insufficient as a response. So how, you know, we can get to all of that maybe in the conversation, but how do we agree there? And that could be one question. But maybe the least interesting for me, because I'm assuming that there's enough of a consensus at this moment that it's much beyond repairing, you know, like how do we connect these wars and the social and political experiences of these last decades with also that, you know, seeing them in parallel to this deterioration in the world at large, you know. So we're trying to find a language and a way of thinking about it that doesn't isolate and tries to see the connections, because I don't see another way for us to imagine life in common. Yeah, Luis, you wanted to? His mic is on, but we don't see him. I think he'll go on the video when he's able to join us.
Okay. I ask too. But could you elaborate on that intellectual tradition? Because one of my major question would be the connection with the concept of human strike, and also that poetic games, because virus strikes, you know, also, but at the same time human strike, and then somehow speculation on unhuman strike, because that first time we have that, maybe not first time, but actually you're absolutely right, connecting with ecology. But at the same time, this intervention really provide kind of, like most events, like we always say in Russia, where you have the biggest danger, there is a salvation, and here with the virus, we really have that certain possibilities, how of stoppage of economy, of new type of relation which grow up. And at the same time, I consider that the whole text and body of work, it's really appeal to another approach, not that kind of, stupidity of that so-called corona dissident, and at the same time, totally opposite. So for me, that articulation of the third way, which we are lacking so much now, was so vivid in your text, and your approach so was, for me, was incredibly refreshing. And especially that idea of human strike, which still kind of inspiring in there, but at the same time, I'm not sure if everyone understands that intellectual genealogy of this term, which comes from, with many from Tikkun and Clairefontaine, and also, I guess it was also Agamben somehow related to that kind of speculation. So would you a little bit elaborate on that?
I can start, but I think no, I just was I'm not gonna speak about that exactly, but I was thinking also today somehow about the notion of eschatology, which is I haven't thought about before, or it's not very important to me, and more in relation to that notion of the end of the world according to religion. And I'm thinking, well, what would it be in relation to Marxism, or to Marx, or to a certain let's say left oriented thinking? Would it be the end of the world, or is it the end of history, or is it the end of the world as we know it? I mean, maybe the end of the world as we know it has also resonance to some other people have been talking about it in relation to decolonial thinking and thorough one thinking, because some comrades say, well, listen, we are in good shape, capitalism is collapsing. And well, I am a little bit uneasy because I don't know how to think of it and from which position, which perspective. And if we think that like more with the decolonial First Nations, or whatever one calls the people who inhabited, let's say, the Americas before the colonials came. And so it's interesting to think in their world as they knew it ended by the entrance of the colonial. So in a way, it's interesting to, and they managed in a way to still keep something. So in a way, the end of the world as we know it, because the world has been so awful as we know it in many ways. So the question is, what are we called for in this moment of the end of the world as we know it? But I'm not sure. Maybe you
Yeah,
can.
and I mean, I think it's a good relation to, let's say, maybe we can come back to the question of let's first think about it in terms of the virus and just the question of strike, which is one of the first effects, let's say, of the virus has been kind of shut down, and that shutdown, of course, fell in very disproportionate ways depending on where you were in the world, where you were at the level of class, race, gender. So all of that fell disproportionately, the weight of the downsides of the stoppage on the people least able in a certain way to protect themselves from the virus in terms of as a kind of you know, in that immunological sense. But at the same time, I mean, what the question that we were asking in that moment, and we still are, although things are obviously great efforts have been made to make things work again, is like if we look around and see all the damage that's happening on so many levels, you know, this is the most coordinated action, you know, on a planetary scale that we've seen, forced by a virus. And what great potentiality there would be for a kind of, let's say, whatever class of people that are oppressed to not see the power of us actually reproducing these kind of systems, and could we just find new ways to be together and hold the situation, like in any extreme crisis that happens, mutual aid networks emerge, people find ways to, and if that could be like imagined in ways that could be, you know, connecting with farmers, finding new ways to eat collectively, support one another, you know, offering each other places to stay. And so, you know, I mean, in a way, there's a basic strike that was happening, and we were interested in that potentiality of that. Now, as it pertains to the question of human strike, I mean, it is a, you know, we don't have Clairefontaine or Tikkun here. And, but I think, you know, maybe it's more something in dialogue with those texts. And maybe there is an ultimately, through this decolonial question, the question around the human in the human strike. I mean, I understand basically that the proposition of the human strike, at least in the way that we've also come to it on our own without reading those texts necessarily, is connected maybe also to some of the writings of Giorgio Agamben, but also our own experiences, which is, you know, maybe in a left tradition, one of the big questions was organization and scale. And, you know, maybe within the context of thinking through form of life, you know, that's it's at the level of our form of life that we're actually forced to reproduce capital, reproduce state relations. Then it's at that level that we need to organize ourselves. And so the idea of human strike is coming, of course, from experiences of feminist struggle, of course, from various other kind of lines, but ultimately it is about the kind of the functioning today of how we reproduce kind of certain relations of force, and producing kind of our own subjugation by being forced into kind of these relations that we agree to. So if there's something to learn from, I think, traditional societies, societies without a state, against the state, whether indigenous to whatever area, we can imagine that also our thinking around commons all these years, that, you know, if people have more connection to the means of their reproduction, which is they're able to reproduce themselves without, you know, needing money, for instance, you know, then they have more autonomy, and they're able to refuse, especially collectively, that kind of process of exploitation that we're constantly trying to organize against. But through, when it's already maybe too late, you know? So how to go back to that place where we can you know, and of course, then you connect it to the ecological deterioration. I mean, are we waiting for states to come and resolve that? You know, for, you know, find top-down solutions that, of course, require very local ingenuity and nuanced ways of caring for land. And so, how better way to address those dire conditions of the earth than through a kind of yeah, collective imagining exit, you know, ways of strike. And I think the question of human and inhuman, these are very abridged, you know, just to not talk too much and leave space to conversation, but is, and so I must have left a lot unsaid, but the question of the human and inhuman is also very critical, because I think that part of this process is like, I think as we see more and more ecological degradation around us, how do we begin to see this as a kind of communication of Earth? And I'm not talking about like some kind of supernatural way. It's just very manifest. And so this kind of infosphere, the way of reducing the meaning of these things, just making them like emergency, we lose this kind of, we're still within this anthropocentered realm where we're not actually taking into account other levels of communication that transpire between us and other earthly life. And so, you know, just to come back to the virus, I mean, to just narrate it differently and thinking of it as a kind of also a displaced entity. And the virus itself is something that really puts you in a total science, in a total kind of quandary. Is it a living thing? Is it dead? Is it something in between? But trying to also recognize that this kind of question of the human and inhuman is one of the great dividing lines that has kept us, I mean, politically, sort of completely, besides anthropocentered, but also all the violence that transpires around us is based around, whether it's around immigrants, you know, citizenship, or it's about black and white, or one group versus another, one religion versus another. There's always this process of drawing that line, you know, and justifying the killing and the murder of whatever is inhuman. So part of that gesture, at least in language, was just to trouble that certainty around the human, which I think we have to prepare ourselves intellectually and spiritually for recreating our kind of relational fields beyond human. I mean, it would come back to even a conversation years ago. We were doing, you know, a lot of work, and we still are thinking through commons. And there was a meeting at Sale with Christian Marazzi and a lot of comrades in Venice many years ago, and it was around commons just after maybe 2008. And I remember that I had that question for Christian Marazzi, and later we did some series at 16 Beaver and also to Michael Hart, like, can we imagine a non-anthropocentered commons? You know, is commons only centered on humans and resources? You know, very reductive idea of commons, because even resources already turns, you know, turns things into objects that are appropriated or used by humans, whereas, you know, we know a sea or anything that would be called commons is used by also other living beings, you know, and hosts all kinds of life, including bacteria and viral. So it's at that level. And the strike, I mean, just one last note, I mean, that is, I don't know how else to disarm this kind of violence around us, really, other than to retract our kind of dependency on those large ensembles that are kind of through their legitimization, sanctioning that violence somehow, or whitewashing it, in the case of museums or educational institutions, and, sort of keeping a nice soft quilt around very violent processes that underwrite them, from their funding sources, their neoliberal schemes, to their board members, to, we all know about that. So how do we, it's hard to imagine a response, but it seemed to us that in this moment, that's what the virus is asking us.
Which is probably at the heart of this kind of process of subjectivation that is launched by all these large ensembles, in a way. We are formed and constantly forming through these bigger processes that enter our life in many different ways, whether it's I don't know, us as artists, as our biography, or us as meeting in a certain way, or having a certain way of doing and certain way of relating, understanding our being in the world through our, maybe I said it, education and the university, and how it is producing those processes of subjectivation. So if you withdraw from these processes, there is maybe something related to this other form of life that creates another form of subjectivation, because through our participation, our creation of our own thinking together, forms of self-created practices to take care of ourselves and others, then there is more hope of thinking of other forms that we more can feel that we have created those and they are creating us, rather than we are constantly being created, that we are actually estranged to ourselves, not only by the fact of work too. It's not, in a way, what Marx saw as alienation, we experience on a multi-level and multi-layer way, and sometimes conscious and sometimes unconscious. So in a way, the process of getting to understand these processes and how they work, but at the same time, not separating that process of understanding and analyzing from creating other processes that help us get out, help the world get out, the world as the ones we inhabit, the ones we want to see and create. So in a way, I'm not sure if it makes any sense.
So some questions, because actually we can continue in different direction, I guess. But at the same time, also for me, that differentiation between human and non-human or transhuman, because actually right now I see in certain relations with virus, with pandemic, we'll see that certain technological, numerological approach, because, I always was fascinated with Ivan Illich and his particular critique of pharma complex and medicine, which, just to simplify, was quite obvious that for a long time fight with the illness which it created itself, so it was really, there is some real form of diseases, but at the same time you should be always kind of sensitive that many things can be treated differently. And actually that the world which we dream and maybe imagine, that also it's not fighting with disease, but actually create your possibility to live with disease, also to build certain symbioses with non-living things, whatever you call it, and then you be in completely another kind of situation where you don't need to really sustain that kind of enormous power of that kind of companies and how they treat the planet, because it also savings here, they ruin the rest of the things completely. So that's my kind of vision, and I also found in your text very much close as far as I understood this approach. And actually that for me was also very important, because unfortunately right now I hear very few voices which can actually keep and insist on that line and trajectory of thinking. So, and right now, I think we feel more and more kind of in that kind of military rhetoric, when someone who is not fighting really, that it's absolutely join the enemy, you know, in certain way. And at the same time, society also shows and state it's completely kind of dysfunction. So it doesn't work in many ways. And even when I follow that stream of information, I'm completely lost, because both kind of experts contradict each other. You absolutely don't know. And even kind of people who don't follow much, but they also feel the, how to say, yeah, they lost. Okay, should I do this or not do that? And you know, all that numbers, and especially, you know, that kind of cult of numbers statistic, which completely senseless in so many ways, because it doesn't tell us the whole, but constructs that kind of dangerous reality, which is danger in different way. And you should really establish different way to deal with that, to overcome, because the way how we deal it right now, from my point of view, it's dead end in many ways. Sorry for speaking long, but anyway,
No, it's
you understand what I mean.
definitely. I mean, the writings of Ivan Illich are very useful, have been for us as well. Not only around that, but his medical nemesis concept, but book that he put together. But he did a lot of different writings, and at the source of it, there is if there is one diagram that he draws in several different ways, and by diagram I mean that it's not like particular to one situation. You see the same kind of pattern, and something very big that I take from his writing is and thinking is about the institutionalization of care.
Mm,
So his one of the basic premises of his work, as we've studied, is that when care is institutionalized, it's taken from a community. And so the care for the environment, the care for one's own body, the care for learning, the care for language, any of these things that are common elements of our reproducing ourselves, when we institutionalize them. And of course you could say, well, family is an institution, so language has a love is an institution. But I think he's talking about it from this kind of perspective of larger ensembles, of states, of bodies, of bigger organizations that go beyond the scale of community. Then what happens is that soon it can be transformed into very oppressive relations, and also resources or products to be later sold to you. And so something that comes, like he talks about, like the invention of the mother tongue is like also like that, that the language is a natural phenomenon that is learned, biologically and culturally passed. And yet there was this kind of contemporary with the colonization processes, in Spain, this process of theorizing the instruction of Spanish language and the mother tongue. And so he gives various times different diagrams of this process, but I do think that another really major difficulty for a left tradition is that, you know, when it comes from the perspective of the state, you know, you see the dead ends. Like, let's say in a place like Canada, somebody who was associated with Illich actually wrote his last testament with him, has written, you know, in like a place like Quebec, I don't know, he says something like 60% of the state expenses go towards medicine, you know, medical costs. And he's questioning that, like, what, you know, I mean, first of all, there's a problem. You can socialize health, but if all the elements of producing medicine and care are capitalist, I mean, it's an extraction machine, you know, from the social wealth to these private corporations. So that's one factor. So even if you socialize medicine, it doesn't stop this process of skewed process of that is profit motivated to produce illness and not even solve it, but just rectify it as long as you can keep selling more medicine. So we have a lot of noise.
1 second.
So yeah, I mean, you know, but basically there we have, it comes back to the basic questions we're asking, which is like, what kind of processes can we be involved in, especially in this interregnum or pause, which we don't know how long it goes, where if there's any social money given to artists or individuals, why couldn't we collectively be preparing ourselves for ways of collectivizing care, communalizing care in a way that is not dependent on states and waiting for instructions, like telling us to wash our hands, or, I mean, there are things that are quite logical. I don't need the state to tell me how to behave.
Well,
And so
there is a certain kind of also, I mean, what you're talking about is important because it's also about more thinking from, if there is such a thing, to think from our own singular perspectives and together in a horizontal way, let's say. Because there is this, I mean, and some people have been like warning in a way the kind of a biopolitical perspective on this, which we are seeing, you know, what you are seeing in this, in the sense of statistics and numbers and institutionalizing modes of behavior and new forms of control and even further and surveillance. So all kinds of paradigms that have existed, the virus becomes for these entities a good occasion to add more, even war, everything that we have encountered and seen in the 20th century comes in this moment very compacted and thrown on us in a way. This is what we are experiencing in a way. So in a way, you have this kind of a top-down from all sides of different kinds of what you call big ensembles, or yeah. So in a way, it's a question of this kind of direction and the other direction, which is a kind of a resistance to it. In addition to it being also an affirmative something, if there is something affirmative in relation to and a kind of action that is aware of the problem and the problem of action, you know, as a, it's not that one.
Well,
yeah.
because ultimately that's the thing. I mean, we're trying to find a way that we can actually dream, you know, and not be in this kind of nightmare scenario, which is the nightmares of other people's dreaming, you know. And so I feel that that's been our effort, let's say, through this society of the friends, and try to involve also other friends to try to write or share some thoughts through these meetings we've been doing, as well, assemblies over the last months, which we do maybe 23 or 24 weeks now. We've been doing them every Sunday, these meetings that are just inviting someone to share some questions that they think the virus has kind of is forcing to ask us. So I think it's an interesting moment because the virus has thrown a lot up into the air, or made more visible a lot of different challenges, and accelerated them also in terms of their becoming manifest. So even so it's what you see in Belarus or Karabakh. They're also part and parcel, or Black Lives Matter, and the kind of movement for Black life here in the U.S. I think all of them, in a way, are also very much triggered by not just failings of the state to respond, but what the revelations on a deeper level, I think, on an emotional, affective level, spiritual level, let's say, um, that are being mobilized right now. And the difficulty is when this unsettling happens, as other friends of ours who've been joining us also on the weekends, like someone like a thinker like Sueli Rodnik, Brazilian psychoanalyst, she has written a lot about it. She had, through also the work of Deleuze and Guattari and schizoanalysis, but she remarks that when these moments happen where like there is an unsettling of the fundament, it's a very special moment because you can also experience other possibilities, but there's a lot of fear and anxiety also. And so the right-wing processes can also emerge, which attempt to capture that unsettling into very reactionary forms, offering kind of more easy solutions to resolve that emotional unsettling. So, we're living in that time where, also we're just throwing some thinkers that we relate to, but like someone like David Harvey, he's also a friend of ours and of the space. And
You want to come sit here?
Because there's sun. One of the things that he's been for many years like thinking through is like where does social change occur? How do kind of big changes happen? And he's not alone. Many thinkers have tried to kind of account for various levels. Changes in everyday life from our perspective would be the biggest, and that's hence human strife. But you could say like on the level of ideas, you could say on the level of relations between capital and labor, you could say on the level of technological innovation, you could, so these are all levels at which nature in its capacity to kind of hold what's being kind of extracted from it or required of it. So, this is a moment in the time of this virus that all those are kind of like thrown up, and so there's so many different fields that are open to reconsideration. And so for us, maybe the question for all of us as artists is, should we be so keen to get the whole thing up and running again? Like I have exchanges with my friends and they say, oh, this exhibition got delayed, this thing got delayed, and I don't know what's going to happen. Or even friends of ours saying, I'm bored. And it's remarkable for me because I feel like I don't have enough time do all that I want to do right now, because I feel the most urgent time to be organizing on a different level together, a kind of social infrastructure of community rather than the one of whatever racialized capitalism, white supremacy, you know. So how do we begin to do that? I mean, using whatever means we have like this, but I think we need to be organizing on another level to create other conditions for ourselves to think together, to have these conversations, to plan also associations and ways uh, to fight, you know, against these processes.
Okay. I mean, just to be able to always have this different analysis of what we are living, to be able to create a different reality also together. I think this is, for me, the present and you of this virus open time, basically, because you also realize how much time is spent in actually unnecessary activities in this so-called normal life. It's really unnecessary and time wasting, you know, even on the level of the city life or habits we have. And it really allows us to pose this question on a very micro as well as a macro level, and the relation of both, not as a scale, but more as as these two interrelate to each other, you know. So it's the habits, that is, how do I get my food? Do I go to this store or to a chain store or to an unnameable whatever, even organic, or do I go to the farmer's market, or can I actually plant my food? And so it starts from there. And do I have to constantly I don't know, taking the occasion, if we are seeing each other, make it a kind of something relevant in relation to this horizon. I mean, I don't know, maybe we are a little bit too
Functional?
no, because everything else
No, it's
anyway,
rich. I mean, it's
is
not
there.
functional. What chit chat is more functional for capital. I mean, in a certain way, no, because
Forms
it
of
just normalizes like underlying violence of everyday existence. I mean, that it's required. So why not? I mean, I feel that we have failed somewhat
Even
in
on
these
that
months.
level, on the level of what we say and what we speak, all of that is, for me, is questionable. Or the meaning of like having a conversation is questionable. When I say something, does it really arrive? You know?
Graciela was Graciela is joining. Actually, I wanted to ask you, yeah, very straightforward question, but I think many positions can be shaped through that what we really understand what is health, you know, because I guess that what position of the state and the capital towards that kind of the health of the population, that numerological kind of way, and possibilities of really counting something quite different from another vision of what is healthy. I mean, I'm not talking about healthy food, but just general concept. Can you a little bit elaborate? Because I think here we come to very key issues, because it allows us to really determine our position more kind of precisely. If it's possible, I'm also not sure about it, but at the same time, as far as I understood, in certain kind of quarrel with some friends and comrades, so we come from different vision of health. What is healthy life? If we should use this word at all, you know? But I think it's one of the key things, and would be great if you could tell something about it.
On what I'm not sure on which level to relate to this question, actually, because in a way, the biggest sickness is certain modes of thinking, I think, for me. That is the utter, that is where I think of that. When you say that is, I think the healing that needs to happen in order for all that what we are talking about to happen. It is really difficult because these are the fundaments of modernity, of everything that we are standing on. I mean, I don't know, I'm just saying, one has a, like the whole 20th century philosophy tried to break this in a way to try to get into a certain approximation of a healthier, in a way you see all the manifestation of the sickness we live through, all these, let's say what we mentioned, Nagorno-Karabakh war, or the beginning of all the 20th century, and how we can create a relation to those with a prospect of health. It goes back probably to this, I think, to that basis of certain thinking, of certain denial of worldly existence towards something else always. And that is sick in a way, because to project, I don't know whether it's God or the nation or the race, that is kind of sickness in a way for me. So to understand how these,
or modernization or development, or
there's a lot of, I don't know if, I mean, some philosophers say it is sickness, and they have definitely thought in relation to this Genesung, which is becoming healthy and the process of getting there. And I think for me, when you said this, that's where I feel this is the relation to that, and what brings that notion of the everyday speech about health and sickness, let's say, is definitely coming from that thinking that is, in, I don't know, problematic, that is really needs help in a way, needs to be corrected. I don't know, the words are always tricky, you know, you say a word, you constantly feel there is something else wrong with the world, with the word itself.
Well, I mean, we're making like a map of thinkers also, because in a way they're all influencing the some of the texts as well. So I would say Nietzsche is another figure that is very important, and of the kind of philosophers of the 18th and 19th, 19th and 20th century. Certainly, you can count him as one of them, sort of in the Western tradition anyway, some very important thinker as it pertains to health, and it's a big figure in his writing. And you know, Nietzsche himself suffered basically most of his life, besides his mental collapse toward the end of his life. He was always having migraines and problems, digestion issues. He had a very, and everything in his writing is based around moderation of food. And you can think about also the antiquity and the philosophical traditions that Foucault kind of also excavates in his kind of archaeological work towards the end of his life, right? You know, which is like the Stoics, but various traditions that were all like perspectives on health. You know, that philosophy is actually, by the time that you know, Foucault arrives at these later works,
Right.
what interests him is purely, you know, he's already there. You know, he's already where we are talking from right now. He's saying science fails, religion is not there, and law is not working. Okay, these are, let's say, three regimes of like truth or ethical coordination that are all like lost.
But wait, I
So
mean, what you always mention whenever, when you read the Care of the Self, Foucault, is that there was this division between.
yeah, no, I will go there.
You will
But
go.
go ahead.
No, I
No.
wanted to. I
Because
thought.
I mean, we can go there together. I just let's keep that later. That's a more fresh thought that I'm having in this moment. In the case of thinking through Foucault and his use of the question. I mean, when you read these texts, they're all about kind of moderation, not how much sex, not too much, this, drinking, that. So there's this whole like bodily dimension to the philosophical kind of relation. And so what took him there was actually what I was just talking about, like legal, religious, scientific relation of the truth is failing us. So when he goes back to this antiquity, that's what he's digging up. And it's a very important period of his work. I mean, we're interested in his writings in general, but not in this kind of flat way where he becomes like Foucault and it just means knowledge power, you know? And meanwhile, there's a lot of nuance and richness in his thinking. And certainly as it pertains to health, I mean, one of the major discoveries, and for him it's critical in terms of trying to reimagine ethical coordinate for our time, is that he believes that there's been this split between knowing thyself and caring for yourself. So that's like a major discovery that we can't emphasize enough, and we haven't written or done enough about it. But I think one needs to really go there because I think it also connects to a lot of decolonial processes and thinking, you know, like thinking about the severing of the head from the body, basically disowning the knowledge of the body, all of these processes that are tied to kind of colonial, you know, and patriarchal, finally, way of devaluing the body, you know, and the labor that the body entails, going further and forward towards abstraction and thinking and rationality and reason and calculation. And so the care of the self is basically, according to Foucault, there is no knowledge without it being also a knowledge of the care of the self. Thus implies a question of health, no? And so what Irene is saying, read through Foucault, is absolutely clear. You know, the sickness of thinking is tied to a thinking that loses the relation to the body, that loses the relation to, and let's just also bracket this idea of self is not like a pre-existing self. I mean, for Foucault, there is no self other than this care. There is no sense of body or health other than this practice, which is tied to thinking, which is tied to, so I know it sounds very philosophical and seems fanciful, but for Foucault, and we're in agreement, I mean, to get out of the ethical quandary that we're in, which is like basically, what is this relation to truth when, you know, it's something that is only in a book, you know, and is no longer lived, it's meaningless, you know. So we've created a process over so many years, I don't know, one could say 500, but that knowledge has gone further and further away from its relevance to health, to our well-being, you know. And a quick note about Nietzsche. I mean, Deleuze says about Nietzsche that sickness is a perspective on health, and health is a perspective on sickness. So, you know, through Nietzsche, so it's a little theorem that maybe in the recording is more useful than now, but it's interesting to think about it. That is not, they're not fixed conditions. It's a perspective. Health itself is a perspective on sickness. Sickness is a perspective on health. And so there is a kind of, it's a field wherein which why some of the greatest thinkers or artists or people we rely on were all, by normative terms, sick, mad, unhealthy, you know. But they are perspectives on health, you know, and they trouble the normative idea of health, you know, which has so much to do with normative ways of thinking and relating to our world. So it's a mouthful, but I think it's
Good.
a nice way to dance with your
Yeah.
lead.
Maybe some questions we collect from Graciela with us and Ale, Nico. Oh, Mao would like to tell us.
Yeah, I would like to thank you because I really appreciate the density and the complexity of the different layers that you are putting together, and the quality of your conversation. So thank you for your generosity. One of the things that I really felt that is quite interesting is this temporal scale that the temporality that you were discussing before. This idea that, you know, on the one hand, there is this kind of eschatological perspective of the end of the world, but obviously we need also to resist that kind of perspective. And then there is the issue of space as well. There are all these fragments of crises that happen on a global scale, but also are very local. So they are difficult to piece them together. And then there is the body and personhood itself goes through this split between wanting to embrace the change or to resist change, and on the other hand, to work on itself, on ourself, on our body. And so there are all these different dimensions and somehow are kind of in frictions and between each other, in tension between each other. And what I really like is that in a way, you kind of sketch a horizon of resistance, that it's resistance in two ways. In one way is a kind of, I would call it passive, but more a kind of inward kind of resistance. There is a resistance that work against time or against embracing change. And on the other hand, there is also a resistance that is more active, and there is a resistance that it's about, for instance, building the commons, or about creating alternative circuits of care. But obviously these two things are connected, because once you create a circuit of care, you also create the condition for the state, for capitalists to appropriate them. So I guess was just first a comment, because I think that you're sketching a horizon of politics that it's very it's very layered, and I identify with these two levels of resistance, so with these two conflicting space of resistance. And the other thing is it's, you know, I am an anthropologist, I am a researcher, and in fact I feel that I'm quite stuck, you know, in this kind of moment of interpretation. And I was just interested, as artists who work in preparation. I mean, my feeling is that the best thing that can happen is that actually the virus doesn't disappear for a long time, because what I'm noticing is that the reorganization of capital and states is very quick, but is, you know, it's kind of stopped when the virus spikes up. So I just, you know, I just wanted to see in terms of temporal scale, in terms of temporality, in terms of also relationship between these two levels of resistance. Yeah, how are you organizing yourself? You know, how you would suggest to get organized?
Yeah, I can start. I'm not sure if I'm going to answer. It's just more because you said the internal and then the other part. So I just want to say that it is important for us to to think there is no such thing as an internal. If there is an internal, it is the internal of the external in a way. And to keep this in mind, because it is a kind of a relation to a line that is an outside, the line of the outside. In a way, the virus has a relation to that line of the outside. And the question is also is the question of this subjectivation. And if we see our subjectivation as a kind of a fold in relation to that line of the outside, I mean, that line of the outside is dangerous because it can be the line of death in a way. So we need to see how this fold is folding, and to make sure that it doesn't go towards that, you know. So in a way, art is at the heart of this kind of fold of this our own subjectivity. One line is that, and this is for us, it's important to do art because it is such a line that helps us and saves our life in a way. And yeah, it's just a note in relation to
But
that.
I think the challenge would be like, I mean, it's very hard because I think it's maybe something to converse as a group.
And I mean, it's relation. I can, since you mentioned Foucault and you say, well, power, knowledge, and, you know, I can say something in relation to what you said and try to reformulate it in such a way that this kind of modes of subjectivation, that is the fold of that is possibly what we are, maybe, I don't know the word to be or whatever, but it has a relation to these other two, and to understand precisely that what kind of relation, in a way, that this power that is always about the forces, that is not formed, that always moves towards something that is more like knowledge, that it forms knowledge through these lines and then creates and then acts on the subjects in a way. I mean, but so in a way, how the detail of this kind of intricate kind of diagrams, the diagram of power that acts onto those forms that shape into a school, a university, a family, and the military, and how they shape this person from birth on. You know, the baby is born and the papa says, haha, you are not in your mother's womb anymore. And then the child goes to school, they tell him, haha, you are not at home, this is not how you act. And this grows up and goes to the military, and they tell them, well, you are not in the, you know, you are not at home, you are not in school, you are in the military. So you see this shaping of a certain behavior and a mode of being. And this is what, if we mention a name, maybe that's why I'm saying that. But you said no, but something, you were saying something else.
Yeah, I might have lost the thought. Yeah, no, I think you know, there's a real difficulty in this moment because we've been also listening to a lot of people and trying to look for ways. So if there is a kind of more inherent question that you're asking, it's a profound one that we couldn't offer an answer, I think, other than to continue having, it's unsatisfactory, I know, but to continue meeting. And, you know, as another friend of ours that Nicola and Alessandra also know, Manolo, keeps saying, renewing our habits of assembling. But this kind of has been very important for us to find ways to be with others and to really learn our way through this. I think also Dmitry can talk about it, as well as Nikolai, in terms of it's very connected to the Zapatista experience, you know, because I think there's this kind of like presumption in a historic left that everything is kind of already determined. I mean, come back into the eschatology. There is a kind of inertia taking us, capitalism is part of this process that is kind of going to take us towards the promise of like a classless society. And I think in a way, you know, Zapatismo, because it's connected to also an indigenous communal experiences, it understands that we have to learn our way through this. We're not going to have ready-made answers, but we've been already learning, we've been already studying in whatever ways we've been already organizing, preparing. So now is the moment, I think, where whether we studied anthropology or whatever, there's plenty to unlearn, but there's also plenty that we can draw on from what we have been studying that can kind of be put into the pot of looking for the way, you know, together. And those depend on where we're located, who's around us, or getting close to people that we feel that we could do things with and enhance our powers to you know, communalize certain processes and depend less on selling our time towards you know, institutions that are much more effectively capitalizing on our you know, and vamping on our energies. So why is it that so many professors find their most meaningful activity inside these kind of horrible universities, like in the context of the US, that are indebting people and part of a really big system besides, you know, in a way acting as a legitimacy of that system, but really through the indebting process, I mean, creating a whole chain of events from childhood of parenting to them getting the right scores, to investing in their education from childhood all the way to adulthood. And as my father once said, monsterhood, you know, which raising them to be competitive, to find scores, to, I mean, it's not just the college. So when you're there, you're reproducing a whole ensemble, you know?
I'm afraid maybe you have misunderstood me. I was not defending the education as such. I mean, I was
absolutely not. No, I hope nothing I said seemed like I was thinking with you.
No, I was appreciating really, in fact, the quality of the conversation and this kind of conversation that we're having also here with Dmitry and with this Institute of Radical Imagination with our comrades. It's a similar moment in which we have very intense conversations and where times in a way expands and where we create this kind of resistance or strike because we refuse to be productive as well. And what I was really appreciating was precisely this, that these moments have their own feeling of resistance because they have both the active seeking, but also the refusal to be elsewhere and to reproduce you know, discourses elsewhere. I was just thinking how important would be, in fact, to create, you know, circles that are maybe, you know, more connected internationally and you know, that kind of methodology that I thought that was very, yeah, that could, yeah, they could somehow bring us to leave these moments for longer, because I think that the most important thing is to actually keep this resistance for a long time rather than give up to any kind of yeah, alternative, let's say.
I definitely think we're I mean, we
are riffing with you. We're not
because some point
here we felt that
we're just taking a tangent in different directions, but
because yeah, no,
inspired by what you said, let's say.
Yeah. Okay.
And also just to say something more, I mean, in relation to what you just said, absolutely. I mean, like you see a formation that's more molar, like in the imaginary of like this progressive international, you know, attempt at kind of thinking the international from a kind of a left imaginary of party, of some process like that. I don't want to dismiss that. There's plenty much worse to be against, so we don't need to be against that. I mean, that's not the point. But I do think that what would it be from other social actors like ourselves who have had kind of across our friendships over time, very strong connections, even if not exactly aligned in every sense, aesthetically or even politically, totally, but very close in terms of searching, looking for ways, you know, open, in embracing dialogical processes. I mean, what would it be from our perspective and practice over these years to use this time now to build kind of more interesting meshworks and weaves between communities, and then slowly find ways to act and do things together, but not in this kind of molar imaginary where we have, like, I don't know, figureheads that stand for the great intellectuals of our time. I mean, they could be part of us, but not in that way, you know? And we begin to actually have smaller discussions. So rather than a big meeting that breaks out into groups, we actually start as small groups meeting, but find a way to assemble larger together and discuss these things and think through how will we strike against these bigger institutions in the cultural field, for example? How will we, what ways can we create where our richness of creation or our ideas are validated by one another rather than these institutions? Why do we give them the authority to select us, to differentiate us, to separate us, to individualize us? You know, why can't we create economic kind of processes also that can support communal infrastructures? If one of us is separated, how can we be accountable to the communities that we're working with? So these are all, I think, the questions that we need to be grappling with, that are very grounded in our reality and our practices, but at the same time, attempting to work through larger questions that are not like, oh, it's only about art workers, you know? I'm not even an art worker. I feel like a striker, permanent, you know? But I can talk to people who think of themselves as art workers, you know? But I'm more interested in them joining the strike, you know? Rather than finding better wage relations as art workers, you know? So
but strike, it doesn't mean you don't do anything.
no, obviously,
it's more
it's like
an activity
liberate
that
us.
questions every activity in a way.
Yeah, so it's more about liberating territory for determining what to do with that time on our own terms, you know? And validation processes, let's say, if we need to even use this stupid word, certification. I mean, that's what the university gives. And in a certain way, a museum certifies you as a professional, but who wants to be a professional? I mean, you know, I mean, how many professionals do you know that you are friends with, really? So
I know one.
I know more.
no, it's a hindrance to friendship often rather than a pathway. You know? Despite professionality, we become friends sometimes, you know.
I see
Luis is back.
Nico would like
Ale
to
and
say
Nico.
something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to
Oh,
check without video because Dima switched our video off.
I
Okay.
don't know what I did. I wanted to actually to chat, but actually what happened? Can
We
I?
can't switch the video on anymore, but it's all right. It's all right. It's
through the voice.
yeah, one little provocation from the part of Что делать rather than answer or a question. Because almost 10 years ago, and Dima and Tsaple were a bigger part of this investigation project. We've made a lesson of discontent. And there was a very funny little piece that echoes a lot of topics that we went through today, and we are still constantly trying to rethink within this period of pandemic. And we touched upon those questions of what is health, what is the collective, what is the society, and society of the friends of whom and against what. So this piece was particularly based on the texts, very poetic, very contradictory in one sense, and on the other hand, very metaphorical and up to date, and political, Marxist, hardcore Marxist, dialectical writings about what is health and what can be considered the bigger damage to the health of the society and the health of individual. And in their writing, it's clearly said that the biggest disease is capitalism, right? And to defeat capitalism, we have to really kind of exercise ourselves mentally into real political struggle and political practices, which actually at this point I would find also maybe metaphorical, but maybe also very practical proof when we were all following the escalation of the virus wave in the US. Then the Black Lives Matter struggle happened. People went on the streets and the wave went down, apparently. What is happening in Belarus right now is the people struggle for the whole month. And the reports from Belarus, from our comrades, doesn't say that people are really like developing a new wave of disease. Vice versa, it really goes down. It's still like the disease that probably is somehow echoing or reflecting or mocking capitalism in some ways is stepping back. So this little...
Or maybe there is collective power of healing.
Or yes, exactly. There is a collective like political power of political healing, collective political healing that I really trace in between that piece of Stodelit and the reality that comes and that we are all facing. That for me is, yeah, a nice navigation through that really gives hope in these hopeless times.
Yeah, thank you for this brave comment. Yeah. Yeah, because right now I'm also feel that somehow you lost, because you know our politics was somehow based on certain horizon of utopia. Of course, we encountering hard times not recently. It was already with us for a long time. We speculate on failures, you know, and tragedies. But at the same time, right now, I feel more discouraged, because right now you really feel you need enormous efforts just to survive. Keep horizon inside of emancipation, but at the same time, you need enormous efforts, much bigger than before, to survive and somehow protect your territory, your vision, your way of thinking. I really appreciate that you talked about that the biggest sickness is the wrong way of thinking, you know, and that actually last thing which we have to protect and actually insist on certain things despite everything, you know. And yeah, and right now we have completely kind of unclear future. And actually also what Mao was trying to talk about, the way how we reorganize our communities. The same I see here in St. Petersburg, where many things fall apart, and actually a lot of process which supposed to be mobilizing process become more kind of healing process, when you really need to really support people in their basic condition of survival, like we see with our students, like we see with our comrades who are really losing hopes. And that really demanding, I would say, and I would prefer maybe to have another more bright situation, but unfortunately right now you have really clear in materialistic way understand where you are. So I don't know, Louis again with us. So maybe I remember you called him for some comments. I don't know if it's still the chance for him to join.
I'm sorry, I had to go, and I missed the whole thing at the beginning.
Problem, no problem.
But no, I was just thinking now about this that Nico was saying, and Ale, and yes, it's true. Maybe it's kind of moment in New York when the whole this wave of Black Lives Matter protest, or when the killing of George Floyd happened. That is true that that few days before, I mean, the day before it started, and we all went to the street. It was unthinkable to be, like all of a sudden not caring about all the protocols, the distance. I mean, it was not the demonstrations. People we try to take care as much as was possible, but we were packed in hundreds of people together, many occasions. But all of a sudden, it didn't matter so much, and I don't know. I mean, I was expecting that the number of infections was going to grow. I think many of us did. It made sense, but it's true that the fact that it didn't, it's really interesting. I mean, I don't know, maybe we're fantasizing, but it's true that it had some quality that was so clearly necessary and strong and unstoppable, and like a release of energy that was accumulated for a long time, and this thirst for justice, and or whatever you want to call it, and that it for sure it had a healing effect somehow. I mean, um, I don't know if we can make cause and effect.
But I remember well that actually in Society of Friends of the Virus, there was very important remarks on the fear and the role of fear and actually connection between fear and health. Maybe makes sense. I don't know, it's pure speculation, but at the same time, fear and panic, that one of the few very deep destructive feeling, and especially when you go on the mass scale, that really creates incredible damage. Of course, it's pretty obvious to say it creates damage to mental health, but at the same time, I'm not a doctor, but I would imagine in this case, it can be really create certain damage to physical health as well. So, and that's why the certain kind of
Sure.
manifestation which we recently observed, and actually with this virus we see many contradiction. Even recently was also very strange observation that actually most of a lot of people, there are no statistics, statistic is crap in many ways. Actually those who get sick, that was most kind of cautious about their behavior, about how they interact with people, and a lot of people who actually were more relaxed was not really infected or get it in a more easy way, you know. I don't want to say anything about it, but at the same time it was really kind of
I
observation.
mean,
I'm always super relaxed about it, so he got like really slightly affected. But
well, you
Yeah,
enter. I think this is you were talking about the third way, and it's a funny relation to the political histories that we feel connected to. Um, but definitely, music. That's one other way. Fourth way. Probably have to think of the fourth way. But I, a few quick remarks regarding all of that. I mean, for sure, first of all, that from all our studies or thinking about health from a kind of like physiological perspective, because I think it's very reductive to think about it as we were speaking earlier only on those terms. I mean, one could really say from another perspective, every thinking, you know, if it's worth its weight in anything, has within it embedded a thinking on health and sickness. And that also is troubling. You know, it has very troubling histories because you see it in the way of the birth of the clinic or the history of madness. You know, thinking about how that kind of certain process of thinking produce certain institutions. No, also, and so, but that aside, I mean, for sure, if we think about it physiologically, the very idea of the psychic and the somatic being separate are kind of totally very limited, you know. In the kind of allopathic Western medicine, for instance, psychosomatic is associated with like a imagined illness or something it's comes from your head and it manifests in your body or something that you think you're having it, or even the idea of a placebo when they test medicine, you know, like they will give people a placebo and they will give people the real medicine, so called, and then there's a placebo effect, which means that some percentage feel better by getting this pill without, and that's kind of usually considered like not considered in medicine, you know. And so, for example, like in psychiatric medicine, like for depression, the statistical difference between a medicine that they approve and the placebo sometimes will be like very little, like 25% versus 15 or 20, or 35% effective versus 25, and yet they will approve that drug. And for my taste, you know, if I was suffering, I mean, I would say you can't say give me a placebo, but if I have only that difference of a chance, I'd rather take a placebo than the real. And so the undermining of this connection between what we think, how we perceive, and our general state, you know, physiologically or otherwise, is totally part of what we're confronted.
There are many different cultures who create a different relation to the body, different maps, different ways. And I mean, apropos of performativity, art, I think, let's say, of Les Maîtres Fous. No, this is kind of of something
a film by Jean Rouch that you can search for it and find it online now.
Yeah, in a way, how let's say certain practices of shamanic, let's say, practices, or I don't know what to call them, that create something to create a process of healing through role playing. And in this film, it's also the colonial enters the process. So in a way, it is a difficult thing to think of health as something separate between, like, oh, it is the health of the body and the body is this, you know, as such. You know, the limitation and of the body is defined as such. So in a way, all that we have been talking about today is related and connected to the body that is not this kind of body of Western medicine, or it is a kind of in each place that we spoke about, you can see this point, this singularity, this something that has many forces traversing it, that is pushing at it, coming down at it. And it's, of course, when this happens, there is a kind of a friction, there is a problem, and the manifestation of something, and then there is something to think about, how to relate to it, how to deal with it. So I'm just trying to zoom out and think
Well,
of that.
this is why if we come back to the third way or whatever would be fourth way or fifth way, I don't know, but just like getting beyond the dichotomy of like true or false, you know, yes and no. What we in the text, in one of the texts from the contributors of the society, is referred to as the truthers and the denialists, you know. So there's this kind of the truthers, you know, in the way that in English it's used, it's like more associated with like people who, you know, conspiracy theorists or people who thought that 911 was like an inside job. And so they're called truthers. And we actually in the society like transform the term, and truthers are like the people who say it exists, it's a virus, but then have a very reduced relation to it. It's just this kind of biomedical term. It means this, and it's the truth. And so we have to rely on science to tell us what to do. And so it's like a vision of a technocratic society determined by a group of scientists who will tell us what to do. And like you said in Illich, but also I thought of climate change in a similar way. I mean, that same science has produced the whatever they call climate change. And so now we have to rely on them to tell us how to get out, you know, that vision of the world, very instrumental and so and reductive. And the denialists would be then the people who say, oh, it's not true, there's no virus, there's no such thing, and it's a fake, it's concocted by Bill Gates or whomever else, and we should just go on and like live our lives, and that's why we shouldn't wear masks. And so you're stuck between two positions that are equally like deplorable. Neither do I want to submit myself to this reductive truth, you know, nor do I want to deny that there is something that is being passed. I don't know whether it's psychosomatic or not. It's passing between people. Those who have it and go somewhere seems to proliferate. So there is a question there that what is this truth? Something is happening, something is there. How do we make sense of it in our own terms? You know? And so our gesture and our work is there, I think, to recover a relation to that truth that would go beyond this book learning, that would be also connected to how we care for our worlds, and whether we can do that collectively on our own terms rather than waiting for orders from above to tell us how to reconcile and rectify the situation. So, you know, it's all worked out, guys.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Actually, I can't agree more. I'm absolutely trying to find this way in between, and that's where I actually started this introduction. Guys, I hope, you know, we also try not to exhaust, because for many reasons we always think that 2 hours without break make real damage our somatic and physical health on Zoom. And I really miss you and really wish you to hug you in the near future, and also wish Armenian people stay strong and hope. You know, last thing you also related to Zapatism, because I'm permanently asked, where is the hope, where is the hope? And we always have that fairy tales or fables from Don Durita, when Subcomandante Marcus asked him how we can get out of the shit where it was obvious that there was no way to win. And Don Doritos, the Beatle, always say, by miracle. So I'm trying to keep that kind of theological dimension of miracle, and hope if you really believe in something, it might happen. Thank you so much, guys. I really enjoy this meeting. Thanks for your time, and thanks everyone for joining us. And yeah, and hope to be, we have time to meet and chance.
Yeah.
Keep safe.
Thank you.
Virus is not a joke, it's real. And we, yeah, hope to see you again. Thanks, everyone. Ciao, ciao.
Leave with
Bye, bye.
very good. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye, everyone. Thank
Ciao,
you.
ciao.
Bye.
Miracle,
To be with
miracle.
you.
Okay,
Always so rich.
ciao.
It's nice that you are together. Yeah. Take care.
Oh, yeah.
Bye.
Finally. Yes. Bye bye. We
Ciao.
speak soon. Ciao.
Gabriela, Graciela, didn't get to talk, but nice to.
Ciao, guys. I turn off.